story about a kid that commits this act.
Okay, thanks, Jack. Emily?
Our involvement was once Stephen and Jack had a conversation, and then Warp Films, alongside our co-production partners. Our role is really to be working with the broadcaster and with the writer-creators, and then helping deliver that project. So we're involved from the beginning, through the storytelling, through to production, through to the edit. And we just felt as passionately as Jack and Stephen did about the storytelling. We felt connected and engaged as parents to want to be involved in the show.
Thank you. I think that's a good way to start. Curious.
Thank you, Chair. Jack, what research did you carry out when developing and making the show? What did you learn, and did anything surprise you or stand out to you in your research?
So the start of all this stuff is to research as much as possible, and basically you plunge your head into books, into the internet, into talking to people and trying to get a sense of everything. Yeah. Actually, what my research started on at first was how Jamie would be processed through the criminal justice system, in particular that first day. Yeah. And I knew that I had an hour to get him to an interview, and I had to do that as authentically as possible. Yeah. So that was my initial aim. The question was always, why did Jamie do it? And we knew that we wanted it to be a drama in which it ended with, in episode 1, it ended with, you knew that he did it. So we wanted to do a why done it, not a who done it, is the way we grandly described it. Yeah. And then, but answering that question was very complicated and involved a whole number of other factors. And one of those factors involved, Stephen said to me right at the beginning, I don't want to make this easy. I don't want this to be the sort of show where, it's because he had an alcoholic father, or it's because he had an abusive mother, or because the sort of drama tropes that you normally get in these sorts of shows. And that was a difficult thing to engage with, because it meant that I couldn't do the normal things that the drama tropes are actually very helpful when you're working on a show. Yeah. And so we then set about trying to work out a whole number of factors that would have affected Jamie, but I was still not finding something which felt right. I wasn't finding a complete character. And then someone that worked with me, Mariella Johnson, said to me, I think you need to look at incel culture, and I think you need to look at the manosphere. And as soon as I looked at that, that was the final missing piece. Now, Jamie is not a criminal because of the manosphere. He didn't do what he did because of incel culture. He did what he did because of a whole number of different factors in his life, and there are about 60 people that could have changed what happened to him. But that was the missing ingredient for me, and that was the thing that surprised me, because I looked at incel culture, and I looked at that key sort of statistic. And Jamie, by the way, doesn't describe himself as an incel. He's described as an incel by other people in the show. But I looked at that key statistic of 80% of women are attracted to 20% of men. And I thought that if I was a teenager, that would have made a lot of sense to me. That would have made sense of my isolation. That would have made sense of my loneliness. That would have made sense of the awkwardness I feel a lot of the time. Yeah. And so that was the thing that then I thought, okay, I sort of know how to write him now. And I know what's influenced him, and I know about this ideology which concerns me that I feel like I can lean into.
So did that sort of then feed into the different themes for each of the episodes? We noticed that each episode touches on a different theme. So you have one that focuses on his school, for example, another on sort of social media and things like that. Is that how you kind of came about that route?
Yes, though a lot of those things were in place before I even worked out the motive. Because the thing was always, how do we create this complicated perpetrator? Yeah. And we always knew we had to look inside his brain, the psychology episode. Yeah. We had to look inside his schooling, and we have to look at the education system and how that has let him down. We had to look at his parents, and those were all the sort of key spheres of responsibility that we needed to understand, and his friends too, which sort of linked through all of those episodes.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Emily, did you want to add anything?
I don't have anything to add.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Kirith. Just wanted to come back on that. So you'd had those clear themes of where I guess, the responsibility or the interventions could have happened at school or at home and friends, but not social media or influencers. Was that a deliberate choice not to have that kind of theme in with it?
Well, I think it is a theme, and I think it does run through the whole thing. And it was, like I say, part of the sort of sphere of responsibility for Jamie. But that came out in different chunks in different places. As a dramatist, you're always trying to work out ways to tell a story authentically, where you can get inside something and then little bits come out in different ways. And so the social media felt like it could come out in all sorts of different ways through all the episodes.
What I meant was that it's not like a specific influencer. It was the two of that relationship where he describes, for example, pornography. Anybody can see pornography. It wasn't the outside influence. It was the influence on social media amongst friends that was the biggest influence. It wasn't a named influencer, for example.
No, there were lots of things that make up Jamie's complicated brain, and there's lots of things. You know, if I was to describe to you what Jamie's brain looked like, it would take me 9 years to describe it, because he's a complicated mess of things, as we all are, and so all these things play a role in his head. The social media thing I thought was particularly interesting because there were ideas within it. And when I talk to kids, which is the crucial thing, there are ideas within it that really troubled me. In terms of naming influencers, that was deliberate. A couple of people talk about Andrew Tate, they're the adults. The kids don't talk about Andrew Tate. The people that concerned me when I was on my deep dive through, trawling through the internet and changing my algorithm and trying to understand what's being consumed by Jamie were if you've got your Andrew Tates at the top of the waterfall, it was the people in the middle or the bottom. It was the 15, 16-year-olds. It was the 13, 14-year-olds talking to themselves, talking within the peer group. That was the bit that I thought would have the most effect on him. And that stuff is when, you know, it's people that get 5,000, 6,000 hits on their stuff rather than, 10 million or whatever it is. And that was the stuff that really I thought was most troubling, and I thought that was the stuff that Jamie would take most seriously.
I think that's a really interesting take, because I think in terms of the media and politics in general, we talk about the big names, and the ones that, like you just said, is the adults that we are talking about, those influencers. And I think that part was really interesting, that there wasn't that. It was, as you say, from amongst the friends and from the middle to lower level kind of influencers that were the ones that were having the impact. Emily, did you want to add anything on that?
No, yes. I think that it is how Jack really described it. It was talking about the social media and the dependence on looking for answers and understanding is across everybody in all of the characters. The father, Eddie, talks about looking online for the gym and what exercises he's going to do. Everyone is using social media, but one of the key elements and themes was how younger people who are still developing their ideas and still understanding their own identity are being influenced by everyone else around them of a similar age who are also still trying to understand their own identity. So I think that's where we got to with them.
Yeah. Thank you very much. David.
Thank you. Thank you both for coming in. I'll start with you, Jack, and then perhaps Emily, you can add to this as well. So you said you wanted to cause discussion and make change. So what conversations did you want to start as part of the show, and what messages did you want to convey?
Well, first things first, we're dramatists, right? So we weren't thinking like politicians when we were making it. We were trying to make a compelling drama that people would watch. And I think if Stephen was here, he would say that these things aren't as important to him as they are to me, because there were different things that were important to Stephen in the telling of this show. For me, I like drama as the starting point of conversation. I think drama works best when it poses a question, and the best bit about drama is the conversation that happens afterwards. That I've always wanted to be someone that spoke to stuff that, when I was growing up, things like, Boys from the Black Stuff, things like Kathy Come Home, they spoke to me heavily, and I've always wanted to make the sort of shows that provoke those conversations in terms of the conversations that I hoped would happen after the show, they've happened at a faster rate than I could ever possibly have imagined. And the conversations, I think, work on all sorts of different levels. It's the conversations on the sofa. You know, I grew up watching EastEnders with my mum and talking about it with her afterwards. I still remember the stuff that we talked about and what it provoked in me and the lessons it taught me about my own humanity. And then conversations in the classroom, and I've been lucky enough to be part of some conversations in the classroom since the show aired, and it's been really interesting the things that have been provoked through those conversations that have led to a little bit of change just in the way that classroom management might work. In terms of at national level, at government level, I do think we need to think about children's access to social media, and I do think that what Australia is doing in terms of age of consent, social media age of consent, is really exciting, and we should be talking about that because it is the Wild West out there, and boys are hearing things, and girls are hearing things which are really troubling and do affect them, and not just in the form of harm, not just in the form of that they go out and do harm to other people. They also do harm to themselves through it. You know, the amount of boys that I've talked to before and since about the way they look and what they're supposed to look like and how long they're supposed to spend in the gym and things like that. You know, there's a tremendous anxiety and a destructive quality to the internet, which I think we as older people do not understand, and that they're right in the middle of, and I wish we were looking for ways to save them from it.
Thank you. Emily, did you want to add anything?
I think that Jack's right. This is a form of entertainment, and I think that that's what we do. We want to entertain, we want to engage with an audience, and certainly one of the things that I felt really passionately about myself was the representation of the parents and the family around the children. And when I'm making television, I'm thinking, I really want an audience to watch, and if it makes one person just question one thing, just have one different thought that they might not have had whilst watching it, then that's fantastic, and you've managed to connect to somebody. And that's what we've done, but in droves and beyond our sort of wildest imagination.
What was your one thing you wanted to ideally get out of this for the audience?
For me, it was about connection of parents and their teenagers and understanding the importance of communication.
And were there any messages that you'd envisaged that would have come out of the show that maybe weren't picked up?
Honestly, we've been picked over to an extent that I don't think any of us were expecting. So yeah, no, there's nothing that anyone's missed. I mean, I've read articles about sandwiches, about 7 different articles about sandwiches that really shocked me. Why her giving him a sandwich was an act of something or other, and it was like, whoa, no, I just had her giving him a sandwich. I didn't really think it would go this far. So yes, no, there's nothing anyone's missed.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, David. Alex.
Thank you. Jack, to you first off, the show refers to, obviously, and we've touched on this a bit, the impact of toxic and misogynistic influences on young people. Do you think those influencers, why do you think those influencers have had such a success in gaining this following in young men and boys?
Well, I think they would have. I mean, there's something about the time, and I think about the insecurity of the time, and I think, I'm guessing now, right? I'm not. There's people behind me that are specialists in this, but I think they would have had that impact on me when I was a kid. I think that line of the world is against you, and you need to fight for normality, is a very, very attractive line, and that thing of saying all these girls that you look at and you want to talk to and you don't know how to talk to, they are poisoned against you by the world. They are poisoned against you by a culture that means that you are a secondary person to them. So therefore you are in competition with the pack of boys around you in order to stand out. And I think that's a very attractive line. I think that makes sense to a lot of people, and it makes sense to a lot of feelings that you have when you're a kid about not fitting in, about feeling like you're on the outside of something rather than on the inside. I certainly felt like that when I was a kid, and I certainly did things that I'm ashamed of now. This ideology explaining things, I think, would have made it even worse for me.
And I would just add to that, I think that from the reading and research that I had done, and anecdotally as well, I think that there's a vulnerability around the people that are looking for this information. And I think that what you don't see online is as much, it is out there, is as much positive role modelling, because it doesn't scream as loudly enough. It doesn't need to. And so I think that people that are looking for an answer can find an answer, but that comes through the algorithms that will direct you to answers depending on what you're looking for. So I think that's...
Yeah.
Okay, so is it fair to say then that social media is turning the volume up massively on those messages?
I think so, and on those feelings. You know, that these are legitimate feelings that they're feeling. You know, like, you know, that it's not that we're saying it's illegitimate to feel lonely and isolated and angry and all these different things, and it's found a way to tap into that.
Yeah. Thank you. And so to Emily first, and then Jack. What extent, if any, have people who worked on the show been subject to personal criticism or even abuse since its screening?
Jack can definitely speak to this more so. I'd start by just saying that we put an awful lot of safeguarding around our younger cast members in particular, working alongside Netflix in this particular instance. We didn't know how global it was going to become, but we did think that people were going to watch it, and it's the younger people that will have more of an online presence. So we wrapped people around with a lot of advice and a lot of safeguarding, and we haven't had too much of a negative response towards those people. However...
Yeah, I've had a bit. And I'm very comfortable with it. You know, that I'm a bald, skinny, weird-looking man, and some people have made something of the fact that I'm a bald, skinny, weird-looking man, and saying these things, and that somehow my masculinity is the reason why I've questioned other people's masculinity. Well, if you look at how Stephen Graham looks, he looks more male than anyone else on the planet, I think. And so, you know, we're a combination of things, and we work together on it all. So yes, no, my looks have been put under the microscope a little by it all, but I'm absolutely comfortable with those questions being answered. And that's the thing when I talk about boys feeling like they need to look a certain way. When I grew up, my role model was Jarvis Cocker, right? And Jarvis Cocker made it okay to look like I do. If you're being told constantly the only way that you can have any legitimacy is if you've got muscles, that's hard for some boys. I would have found it very hard because I don't grow muscles very easily.
So actually the criticism that you've been getting is the same symptom of the problem.
Exactly.
The show is highlighting.
Exactly.
Right? So it's an
Exactly.
exacerbation. Okay. So my follow up then is some of the criticism of the show. There have been suggestions that the show maybe wrongly portrays incels to be violent, whereas in practice incel violence is rare. That's how the criticism goes. Is that a criticism you accept?
Jamie doesn't describe himself as an incel. So Jamie isn't an incel committing violent acts. Jamie is described as an incel by others. Yeah. So it's a totally different thing. And no, we're not suggesting that incels commit violence. And we're not suggesting people who consume the manosphere stuff commit violence. What we're suggesting is that this combination of factors affected this boy in a very negative way that led to this harm being done.
Did you have anything?
I don't have anything to add.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex. Christine.
Thank you very much. First of all, apologies for coming in late. Can I say how much I enjoyed the programme? I found it incredibly thought-provoking. The Prime Minister actually said that as a father watching the show of this teenage sons and daughter, it hit home hard. And after he said that, it was made free for viewing in UK secondary schools. But I wanted to ask, Emily, schools weren't intended to be your primary audience, weren't they? So with everything that you learnt about teenagers and your research and everything that's happened, the political reaction, do you think that watching Adolescence in a school environment is the best way for children to learn from it?
You're absolutely right. Having it accessible to schools was... I don't think I've really heard of many dramas at all where that's happened. So it's a fantastic, thing for Jack and Stephen to have achieved with it. I think my feeling around that is it isn't a problem with the children. It isn't a problem with the school. I think that if watching the show allows a stepping stone for adults to have these conversations with each other, with the young people, for young people to have conversations with each other, then I think that it's a fantastic thing to be happy to go on. I think that to discuss the themes around it, I think to support that watching experience, to understand why people are watching it, then I think that it would be a really fantastic opportunity.
Do you think it needs a more structured debate possibly in schools around it?
I'd imagine, I really can't speak on behalf of the schools, I imagine no one was planning on just going in and pressing play and walking out the room again. I would imagine that there is a conversation to be had, and I do think that would be an important part, because I think otherwise, again, we're sort of outsourcing young people growing up without facilitating that discussion.
Jack, did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think we're a big question mark, and the answers are through discussion. And so we're not suggesting that we're the answer to anything. And so if there isn't a conversation as part of it, then it doesn't work. The conversations I've had in schools since this show aired have been very, very interesting with people that have been through it and have led to things that I didn't even consider. You know, I was talking to a group of girls who told me that they don't speak in class because there is a group of boys in their class who scare them and who intimidate them, and so they just don't say anything. Those sorts of conversations happening within a school environment so that the school can challenge that and change that could change education for them profoundly. It isn't the show that's done that, it's the conversation after the show that's done that.
And I would just add to that an anecdotal discussion point, but just a conversation that I had been a part of with someone who was a secondary school head teacher of a large secondary school in Manchester, who didn't actually know what I did as my job, was saying, you know, it was very sort of felt as though the show sort of was shining a light just on schools, and it's not the, you know, it's really down to the parents and the families. And so for me, I think if you can engage people like that in this conversation, then hopefully that might allow, again, those people to search for answers. As Jack said, we're not offering the answers, we're just hoping this conversation has been started now.
In terms of political reaction, there has been a lot of political reaction for it. Did that surprise you? And what are you hoping that political reaction, if you're hoping, might lead eventually to?
Yeah, it's been hugely surprising, and yeah, I talked about it a bit earlier, but for me, legislation that protects our kids from the internet is a useful thing to do. I wouldn't be so bold as to say what that legislation should be, but I think it should be larger than the stuff currently under discussion. And I do think that what Australia is doing is very bold and very interesting. And if they can pull it off, I hope that other countries, particularly ourselves, would follow it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. I just wanted to pick up on one of the points where Christine had left off around facilitating conversations. Emily, you'd said that this isn't just we're not going to outsource, or we shouldn't be outsourcing young people to whether it's the internet or whether it's television programmes. You mentioned that there are some places that are facilitating that conversation and having good impacts. Is it possible for you to follow up in an email some of the examples or some of the schools that are doing it well, so that we can see what they're doing and perhaps learn from that for our committee?
Yes, and I believe Tender are very involved in the rollout, and they are a brilliant group of people that are thinking very seriously about discussions that happen afterwards. So yeah, no, we can absolutely do that.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Catherine.
Thank you, and apologies as well for being late, but thank you both so much, and thank you for bringing this programme to us. For me as a mum of 2 boys, it's been really, really important. It's opened up really important conversations for me, but also I was a governor before I became an MP of a secondary school, and sexism was at best hidden, and kind of a little bit under the radar. And now what I think, talking to parents who've still got children at secondary school, it's not hidden and the misogyny is out there. I had one example that my son's told me quite a while ago now, of a woman teacher being, a football was thrown at her during break time by a group of lads. And she couldn't do anything to stop it. And I think she was even too scared to deal with this behaviour. Now, it was obviously she was targeted because she was a woman. So if teachers are facing this, then, you know, what about our young girls? So a question for you, Jack. Based on your research for this show, what strategies do you think government and schools should implement to combat misogyny and better support young people? I know you've talked about some of this already, but are there any other things?
I'm not a specialist. So I don't think I would be able to say this is what the strategy should be. I just think there should be attention upon it. And the sexism really surprised me too. It surprised me in the research. It surprised me in the reaction afterwards. You know, I think schools are very different than the schools we grew up going to. And that celebration of masculinity that this stuff is about has caused serious problems in the classroom and out of the classroom.
Mm-hmm. And do you think, just building on some of the things you said earlier about the internet, do you think there should be stronger laws for online platforms to prevent the constant serving up of misogynistic content to boys?
Yes, very much so, and I think it should be the platform's responsibility as they're making it in Australia, and I think that at the moment they are making money off it, and that is a real problem. You know, that these people are actually have found a way to market misogyny, and that's a problem.
And if I just want to add two things onto it. It would just be from some of the reading and conversations that we'd had during the research, also talking about critical thinking for young people in schools, and also not needing to focus on secondary schools, but this actually starts at primary schools. And I think that's really important, to be understanding words like banter. What does that mean to younger people at primary schools? I think that I don't think it is something that stops when it starts when you're 11. I think it's something that starts when you're much younger.
Thank you, Catherine. On that, with you said that at the start you talked about changing your algorithms, altering your algorithms. How easy was that to do? And you'd said about learning about the level of sexism happening within schools. Did it surprise you, any of the content that you were seeing, once you changed your algorithms?
Very much so. And the thing is, it's not like click on this and you'll see why women are wrong. It's click on this and we'll talk about Minecraft, or click on this and we'll talk about June. And then you're watching someone talk about Minecraft in June, and then they slip into what their day was like. And that's the stuff I think that's really problematic, because that's the stuff that kids just consume generally. You know, you don't have to, and in terms of changing my algorithm, no, it didn't take long, though it still has an impact now. So, I've kept those accounts. I lurk. I'm a lurker rather than I don't declare who I am. But that I still see a lot of that stuff, and I still find it very troubling. But yeah, no, it doesn't take long. I think there's research that it takes 23 minutes or something like that for it. Just if you're just generally browsing, for you to come across this stuff, it's very, very easily consumed.
Okay. And Emily, did you, with your research? No.
Sorry, go on.
Did it happen with your research as well, with your changing of your algorithms, or you didn't do that?
I'm not on social media.
Oh.
So So I don't...
There's this collective sigh of envy, I think, probably around the table, yeah?
I don't have... I will have an algorithm for many other things, but specifically on social media, I wouldn't have had different videos coming up to me because I don't look...
All that stuff was my responsibility.
Your responsibility,
yes.
Okay. So you can't unsee those things. In terms of marketing misogyny, how are they making their money? Is it through advertising? Is it through some of the influencers promoting things? Or how are they or is it you're talking about the platforms making the money out of?
Yeah, I think I'm talking about everyone making money off the whole thing. And again, I'm not someone that's specialist enough to be able to answer that question.
Okay. And in terms of the social media used, what sort of social media was primarily being used by young people?
I went all over. I was on X, I was on TikTok, I was on Insta. You know, like it was everywhere. It wasn't like you can say, oh, it's this spot or this spot.
Okay. I mean, it's just that we've had evidence from faith groups as well as part of community cohesion, and they had said that there's been a notable change. Since Elon Musk took over X, for example, a lot of the Jewish groups don't bother even trying to engage with it now to take down anti-Semitic material because they just don't get a response.
Right.
And I think that every group that we've spoken to or heard from, and individuals that we've heard from, that it's got a worse place in terms of Facebook and X. But these are the mainstream ones. They're not even the ones that if you are going to look for things that are deeply unpleasant, necessarily, that's your go-to place.
It was really interesting because people said, when I've said this stuff about, you know, maybe we need to think about age of consent, maybe we need to think about these things, and they've gone, well, that would just send it all underground, they'll just end up on Reddit and those sorts of things. And it's like, well, no, a small group will do that. And that small group have already been polluted, and it's about protecting my kid's 9. It's about protecting the kids that are just growing up and are just consuming things because they're consuming things. You know, like, you know, they're not going looking for this stuff, and that's the stuff that worries me. It's where it comes inadvertently at you rather than you look for. If you look for Andrew Tate videos, then you should watch Andrew Tate videos. It's when you're looking because my son is a huge fan of Tim Burton. You know, like, you know, and you start looking at that stuff, and then it takes you into a whole different realm, and then suddenly he's watching stuff that makes me uncomfortable, you know.
Yeah. My kid is terrified of Tim Burton. She'll get that.
I'm frightened of Tim Burton.
Rosie.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to talk about TV more generally. I think we all thought the drama was incredible, and I'm a fan of Best Interest as well. That was extremely moving. But given the strong engagement from government over your drama and things like the Post Office drama on ITV, is it important that the very beleaguered TV industry gets more support from the DCMS and from the government? I'm declaring that my partner is a documentary maker, and 75 to 80% of TV industry professionals aren't working, and that includes lots of my own constituents in Whitstable. If you agree that they need to, what might that look like?
Want to start? What?
Well, we could talk about the issues within the industry on another time, possibly. I think this is, you know, we're really talking about the themes within the show, and I think that we sort of feel quite strongly that this show is supported within the UK, and it you know, yes, it was made with a streamer, and we also work with the public service broadcasters, and we think having that mixed economy of production in the UK is really important to support and to get back to thriving. And we're not a million miles away, but we'll need to keep working with them.
So is it significant that it was Netflix and not, say, the BBC? Or?
No, I don't think so. I think it was... I don't know, we will never know if it would have been as global if it was with somebody else. However, we had a fantastic working relationship with the platform on this particular show. But as you mentioned, a different show that Jack's worked on, a different shows that Warp have worked on, it's important for us that this mixed economy of broadcasters stays and works well within the UK.
Well, I think TV's become quite conservative. I think the reason why TV's come quite conservative is because we are frightened about how to get international finance, and often if you're trying to do something a bit wilder, it becomes very hard to attract international finance, and it's very hard to make something for BBC or Channel 4 or ITV without international finance. And I do worry about the next generation of writers, that they will be told the way to make a show, get a show made, is by putting a murder in it. And I say that as someone that's just written a show that's got a murder in it. Adolescence has a murder in it. But, you know, that if we want to create a thriving cultural industry, then we need to be allowing writers to write whatever interests them, you know, be that ice dancing or be that, you know, postal work. And at the moment, because of this squeeze on PSBs, that is becoming very hard for writers, and I do worry for them, and I'm fine. You know, people in my generation, there's a lot of us that are fine. The younger ones, where they've got new stories to tell that will change the way we think about their generation, they're perhaps not being given the same scope that we were, and that does concern me.
Thank you. Do you think it particularly impacts newer writers coming up from different sectors of community, you know, working class writers, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, yes. Working class writers, you know, lower middle class writers that don't live in London, writers that find it hard to be in London, you know, but all writers that have got interesting stories to tell, you want them to be given the opportunity to tell those interesting stories, and I think they're being squashed. And I don't think it's anyone's fault. I don't think the BBC can be held at fault for that, or Channel 4 can be. I think it's the way that the industry currently is. And I think, yes, some support for it would make a huge difference and might change. If we can change this model of, you know, it requires international finance to make a show. If we can change that model, and there are a lot of people trying to change that model within the industry and without, but if we can change that model, then we will start seeing, I think, more interesting shows made.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rosie. And I think that that's really important, not just because they're interesting shows, but because for the equality and the diversity angle of some of the stories that we are being able to see and are hitting our screens. I think that's incredibly important that we do have that access.
And I think TV changes things. Yeah. You know, like, I think TV has enormous power, and I think it speaks to our culture. And if the wrong TV is being made, then culture is being spoken to in the wrong way. You know, if it all becomes about murders, then how are we going to see different? I'm part of the TV Access project that is trying to get more disabled stories told and more disabled storytellers in television. If we can do that, we might change the way that people treat disabled people in this country. And that came out of COVID, and that came out of a feeling that disabled people were way too easily disposed of during that time. And at a time when disability is still, disabled people are still under threat. Mm-hmm. You know, we need stories told. Emily just told a beautiful story for the BBC that involved deaf people. That it's called Reunion. It's amazing. That this stuff matters.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Following on from that, and the fact that before we started today in our private session, I just mentioned that I'd had a meeting with an Italian senator who had watched and had seen and had loved and wants to learn more about your work and the show Adolescence. David had also, who had you met from Argentina?
So Jess Phillips, who's in our home team, she does a home office team, she does a lot of work on, as you probably know, you've met her, both of you, on this area, and she met with the Argentinian Home Secretary yesterday, who also mentioned your work and was deeply admiring of your work as well. So she said to mention that to you.
Very nice.
Yeah. It's had huge cut through, which you both said you didn't expect to be reading so many articles about sandwiches and all of those sorts of things. Are you planning any follow-up work in this area at all?
We are. We're having some very positive conversations, and whilst we feel that Jamie's story has been told, the Miller's family story has been told, we'll be exploring what the makers of Adolescence and the writers will be doing. We'll be doing all together next.
Yeah, I don't think there's going to be a series 2, no. But there might be something else.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Fantastic. We'll look forward to that. And do you feel any additional responsibility in producing work of this type of social commentary to ensure accuracy and proportionality as well? Did it feel like a burden of responsibility to get this right?
But it always does. You know, that's what making TV is. You're representing people and you're putting their stories on the screen. I feel it more keenly when I tell real life stories. I felt it more keenly when I was doing Best Interests, where I spoke to a number of people who'd lost their children, and we actually changed the ending of that show because of a testimony of someone that, you know, it's hard making this stuff, and you are constantly making decisions, as you do in documentaries, as you do in all sorts of forms of television, and yeah, getting it right is very, very important.
I think you've explained in good detail as to the extent of the level that you did in terms of research and how much you wanted to get this right. How does it feel when you hear, say, the leader of the opposition quote what has been described as conspiracy theories around the race of Jamie being, and she said, fundamentally changed in the story of Adolescence?
I think that's to do with her algorithm, and there are a lot of people on X and in other places who make that claim and who have consumed the story that way. So yeah, that just speaks to what she's consuming online, I think.
I think we might all take a lead from Emily and not be on social media.
It doesn't make me unexcused. I do understand. I have 2 teenagers as well, so I would say that...
It's okay, I left X a while ago and my life has been happier since. But I wanted to ask that because we've seen the Takedown Act in the US, and I just wondered whether we wanted to, if there was any merit, because as you said, Jack, this isn't young people looking for Andrew Tate's or looking for Tommy Robinson or whoever it is. They're looking for Minecraft, or they're looking for a game that they like. Do you think that there would be any merit in tightening up the law in terms of porn, violent games, and even perhaps dangerous disinformation that we'd seen that caused quite a lot of the riots and the violence that we saw over the summer? Is there any merit, do you think, when you saw those algorithms, that actually this isn't, it's not always advertised as harmful content, it is buried within?
Yeah, and that's why I think it should be an all-over social media ban. I don't think you can divide this up and go, oh, there's this and there's that, and you can separate that off. And if we talk to them this and that, and if you talk to the amount of kids that take their phones to bed with them, you will be shocked at how many do. It is assumed, because I think the chattering classes, you know what I mean, like, you know, might restrict phone content upstairs, that most kids leave their phones downstairs and go up without it. Actually, an awful lot do. I wouldn't guess at the numbers, because I don't think there are numbers out there. But you know, and that thing of what a kid is consuming at 2 a.m. when they wake up and they feel alone, that's the stuff to stop. Whatever that is, because it's speaking to a part of them that needs help, and this stuff doesn't help them.
Yeah. Thank you. I think that's a really powerful point to end. Does anybody have any other questions before we go to panel 2?
Thank you. Yeah, I actually just wondered, it was something you were saying with the fact it was made by Netflix and all the international money that needs to be raised now to PSBs are, as you said, being squeezed in this country. Should we be looking more to the public service broadcasters to have more of a responsibility to make dramas which are thought-provoking? Because thinking back through the ones which have been the Post Office drama, right back to Cathy Come Home, I think the only one that was done by a public service broadcaster was It's a Sin by Channel 4. So do we need to request or put pressure on or suggest that actually that's a place where the public service broadcasters have a role, is to do that sort of drama?
I think they do feel that responsibility. Yeah. And I think if you watched Reunion, I know I'm now advertising a show, I wasn't a part of Reunion, let be clear, but you know what I mean, like, you know, if you watch a show like Reunion, that has fundamentally challenged the way that stories are told. By using sign language to the extent it does, it's changed the way that that drama works, and the way that BSL works is different to the syntax of the English language, and
the subtitles don't work the same way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So everything has changed because of the way that they told that show, and they told it authentically, and they told it properly, and they told it with a disabled writer. So I don't think it's that no one cares. I think it's that it's really hard to make a show that has an impact. I've tried for a very long time, and you can have little impact, and you can have little impact, and you can have little impact. But what catches fire, you don't know. I would say I May Destroy You was made by the BBC. That had a huge impact. You know, there's a whole number that I could list that I think, you know, challenged our traditional forms of storytelling, and that came from all sorts of different places. Everyone who works at Netflix came through public service broadcasting. Everyone we work with on this show had worked at one of those places. So we all got trained in that world, and we all made this show because of our training in that world. So I don't think it's as simple as going there, not making this stuff. I think everyone is trying to make this stuff. It's just a very, very difficult climate to make this stuff in, because if you are trying to get the Americans to pay for half your show, you've got to take it beyond sometimes you've got to take it beyond the sort of British borders. And if you take it beyond the British borders, there's so few things that travel, you know, and so you end up going, well, if it's cops, everyone knows how a murder investigation works. Do you know what I mean? Like, you know, if it's, you know, it's just about the easiness of storytelling.
Yeah, and I would just add, I think that if we had approached this as a drama about social media age of consent, you wouldn't have watched the same show.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think that's really important. I think that it really, and that, without sounding too whatever it is, it's really about entertaining and engaging our audience. And if the themes that we discuss for hours and you discuss even more for hours, even more than that, if they get picked up, then that is absolutely fantastic. That's brilliant. And if it's seen as a piece of entertainment, that's, you know, fantastic too. But I think that it's important to, I think the BBC, ITV, Channel 4, Channel 5 do look to create conversation with their shows.
I should confess, I came up through public service broadcasting.
Thank you very much, Emily and Jack. I'm really grateful for your time, and thank you for what you've created, which is not just a fantastic and thought-provoking and incredibly moving show, but a conversation which I think all needed to be had, and I'm really grateful for your time today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you to our second panel. We have Matt Pinkett, Misogyny and Gender Equity Specialist, Engendering Change English teacher. Dr. Daniel Guinness, co-founder and managing director of Beyond Equality. And Darren Northcott, who is now standing in for Jane, who's the Deputy General Secretary of the NASUWT. But Darren is stepping in as National Official for Education. So thank you and welcome to you all. Very grateful for your time. And I'm going to start with David.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for coming in today. Darren, thrown in at the deep end, but I'm going to start with you, if I may. Just thinking about misogyny in schools, what kind of misogynistic behaviour are you seeing in schools between pupils? And do you think the level of this behaviour is changing, either increasing or decreasing?
That's a really important point. Our members report to us consistently and more than they ever have done misogyny in schools between pupils, but also, I think, picking up on the question that was raised earlier, between pupils and female members of staff as well. So misogyny is becoming a very unfortunate but more deeply rooted characteristic feature of too many of our schools. That's the very clear message from our members.
Matt, do you have any views on this?
Yeah, I totally echo the what was said about the misogyny and the sexual harassment that's happening to female staff. It's rife. I don't think there's enough being done to protect female members of staff. In keeping children safe in education, there's guidance as to what constitutes child-on-child sexual harassment, but I can't find, I might be wrong, but I can't find any documentation which outlines to members of staff exactly what constitutes child-on-staff sexual harassment. In fact, I often think that as teachers we're expected, because we're adults, oh, that boy's just put something in my body, or that boy has just called me a name. Well, I'm the adult, so, and he's just a child, he's just learning. The amount of female teachers I've spoken to who have been sexually harassed, physically sexually harassed, and I mean it when I say women have had things put in their bodies by children, and then the day later, or even an hour later, they're expected to carry on teaching that child. So I really do think that the government needs to put some guidance in place. There's advice from the unions, but actually no, as far as I can see, any guidance, and of course it's happening to male teachers, but largely it's happening to female teachers. And for some female teachers, it's not just every so often, it's lesson to lesson.
I just want to jump in on a couple of points you both made. So I think you're both in agreement that there seems to be a rise in this type of behaviour in schools. What do you think's fueling that rise?
I think we've just had a really interesting session about a TV drama, but a very important one that I think has touched on many of the contributory factors that we're seeing behind this rise in misogyny in schools. I think one of the really important themes that was touched on in the evidence we've just heard was that, yes, social media plays an important part in that. Sometimes it can be an accelerant, but there are a whole range of other influences on children and young people that can lead to profoundly inappropriate behaviour. So social media is a really important aspect of it. That's absolutely right. But it's directed and has more of an impact on particular children who are vulnerable to those kind of messages. And again, that I think reflects what a lot of our members tell us about why children begin to exhibit these behaviours with all the problems that we know come with them.
Okay, thanks. And Matt?
Yeah, I think many boys are confused as to how to be a man, and many boys do want to be men. From age 11, they cannot wait, for that first pint with their dad or whatever. They're performing a masculinity, and on one hand they're hearing all these mental health campaigns saying that boys need to talk more. They talk, and then either nobody listens or all their friends poke fun at them. They're told you don't have to be strong, and yet it's always the strong boys that get picked for the team. So I think many young boys are struggling to navigate masculinity. I've had boys come to me and say things like, "Am I allowed to hold doors open? I want to have a consensual sexual relationship with my girlfriend, but what if one day we split up and she accuses me?" I think they're finding it very difficult, and actually I think the teenage brain doesn't always deal well with grey areas, and so actually just nailing your flag to the mast of misogyny is easier. Do you know what I mean? It's an easier thing to do, and it's especially easy when it only takes 23 minutes for the algorithms to push that content your way anyway. When we were at school, if you got rejected or dumped, you'd write some bad poetry, go home, cry for a week or two. What these kids are doing is they're going on the internet and they're being told, well, if you want to be attractive to women, or if you've been dumped, well, you need to assert power over her. That's what women or girls find attractive. And so, yeah, I just think they're going through some grey areas that they're finding it hard to navigate, and misogyny provides something concrete that they can understand.
Okay, thanks. And Darren, Matt mentioned he doesn't think there's much guidance from the government around the increasing levels of misogyny and sexual assault and so on and so forth in schools for female teachers. So what has been the government response from your point of view? Are you aware of a government response, and what more do you think the government needs to be doing to tackle this issue?
I think they're interested and concerned about the issue, so I think that does need to be recognised. I think it's a challenging issue, but I think they do want to engage and help work with stakeholders, work with us, work with others, to try and develop some advice and guidance in this area. This kind of sits within a number of different areas of policy. So clearly it's about behaviour in schools, and that's important. Some of the behaviours that we're talking about would be addressed through schools' behaviour policies. But it's also about safeguarding as well. So we're talking often about children who in other ways are quite vulnerable. And so to what extent are there the services, systems, early intervention mechanisms in place to make sure that children who are vulnerable and their families get the support that they need? Because perhaps one of the messages from Adolescence and some of the other accounts that are relayed, if you like, of this issue is you've got children and families that are vulnerable. Those vulnerabilities and those pressures aren't addressed, and in the end they manifest themselves in these really unfortunate ways. So I think the government's listening on behaviour and on safeguarding, but at some point, and sooner rather than later, we are going to have to get to a point where we're providing good guidance to schools on how they can address issues of pupil on staff violence and inappropriate behaviour and abuse, and particularly that's driven by misogynist motives.
To be very clear, that guidance doesn't currently exist.
Not sufficiently, no. There's no guidance you can go to. There is, as I think was mentioned earlier, there is guidance on peer misogyny, and that I think schools do find helpful to an extent. But there isn't the extent of guidance that I think schools would want to see in relation to how pupil inappropriate behaviour in respect of adults is dealt with. Not certainly that I think is sufficient to address the nature of the problem.
Thank you. Matt, you wanted to just
so just about that, about the guidance on I think the language now is child-on-child sexual harassment in schools. So keeping children safe in education. Previously there was actually a document called Sexual Violence and Sexual Harassment in Schools, in which it very clearly outlined what behaviours constituted child-on-child sexual harassment. That document has now been withdrawn, and the information within it has been subsumed into Keeping Children Safe in Education, which is a 185-page document that reads very much like a legal document that many busy teachers don't have time to read in its entirety. Also, only part one of that documentation is actually recommended reading for teachers. The rest is primarily for school leaders. So in that first part of the documentation, it says that teachers need to know what sexual harassment looks like. But actually, it's not until part 5 in which there's some guidance as to what sexual harassment actually is. So again, I think that you could be doing lots of teachers, because the teachers I speak to, and I think the evidence bears this out as well, I think nearly a quarter of teachers feel uncomfortable, 27% according to UK Feminista, feel uncomfortable dealing with sexual harassment. And when I talk to teachers, a lot of them just don't know that what they're seeing is sexual harassment. And I'm sure there's a quiz I do with teachers in some of my training sessions where I give them 4 or 5 scenarios according to the guidance. Is this sexual harassment or not? And I've never met a single teacher that's got everyone correct. And it's not because they don't want to, it's because the guidance isn't clear enough. So I really recommend that a short 2 or 3 page document that exists on its own, that is mandatory reading for all, would go a long way to solving the problem of misogyny in schools, because at the moment children, teachers, stakeholders, parents just don't really know what misogyny is, or sexual harassment is at least. Is wolf whistling sexual harassment? Not according to the guidance. Is pulling down your friend's trousers for a laugh sexual harassment? Well, yeah, according to the guidance. So, there's some grey areas that need to be clarified.
Before Dr. Guinness comes in, can I just ask, because we're talking about schools and you keep saying there's no guidance in schools and teachers are reporting this. Just to be clear, are we just talking about secondary schools or are we talking primary schools as well?
I'm speaking as a secondary practitioner, yes.
Okay.
We certainly hear examples of that kind of behaviour in primary schools as well as in secondary.
Okay, thank you. I think that's useful for us to know.
Did you want to come in very quickly, Dr. Guinness?
Sure.
Yeah.
Very quickly, yeah, it will be my ambition for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's something really important to see here about the different forms of misogyny that are coming out, and actually how it includes things like objectification and sexualization, both of young women and girls in the class, but also of teachers, right the way through to things like biological essentialism and discrediting of women's ability to do different roles, and that there's often here contradictions that are coming up for young people. And I think this was one of the great things that came out of the television drama Adolescence, right? Like those contradictions where the boys be reporting back to us at the same time that the girls are outperforming them and far cleverer than them in classroom and keep on getting these plaudits, and at the same time that women are inherently not as smart as men. And it's those sorts of contradictions are quite difficult to challenge because it's not a factual piece of information that we need to provide to young people here. It's a different type of education. And this is, we can see this in other parts of tackling this misogyny issue. It's not an information shortage that young people have. Now that over the past 10 years, we've seen a massive increase in the level of knowledge of the young people that we work with. And we work across, we're working with about 7,000 different young people a year. They're aware about these issues. Social media has actually helped in that regard. However, how they respond and understand the sorts of discussions we talk about are very variable, and quite often for them, it's they're seeking out to behave at a low level. They're seeking out to behave in these misogynistic sort of ways as a form of humour and as a form of trying to gain social capital amongst their peers, and that's leading to a broad normalisation of these sorts of behaviours amongst those cohorts. So what we need to be doing here is actually seeing this as being a primary prevention issue, as opposed to something where we're working only with the people who are already at like a extreme violence or extreme form of misogynistic type of attitude. We need to be addressing this right the way across the school, and I would say a lot of that work gets dumped on teachers without additional training, without additional support. Or with not very much, as we've already heard. And there's a huge role there for organisations like us and other experts who specialise in this work. And what's more, that there is some responsibility that school teachers, other staff and parents have to take for their responsibility in actually reproducing some of these problems. Like if we run focus groups with girls or young women in schools, they'll often report back some of the gender differences in behavioural management that impact upon them, that can actually reinforce some of the sexism in classrooms. They'll report back in the most extreme examples about male teachers commenting about their appearances in front of the classroom. So these things, I'm not saying this is happening at every school and everything, but these are issues that might not be on the radar, that we need to make sure we say this is not just the young people have a problem that we're trying to fix, but we need to actually build up these institutions with proper resourcing and proper support from top to bottom.
Thank you very much. And just a final question from me. You've obviously heard the evidence from the team from Adolescence, and you mentioned it as well, Dr. Guinness. Obviously, the government's desire is for this show to be shown in all secondary schools. Do you think this is a good idea? Do you think it's a supportive idea for starting to open this conversation up? So we'll maybe start with you, Darren, and then just go quickly along the line.
Obviously a really powerful resource, and I think it's led to a lot of interesting conversations. I don't think you'd want to mandate that every school should be showing this particular drama. They may have other approaches that they might want to adopt. So as a union, we certainly wouldn't say you should do this, but I think we would very strongly commend it to schools to think about it. But also the point that I think was raised in the previous evidence session is really important. It can't just be a question of just showing the drama and that's it. There has to be a structured conversation and dialogue around it. I really was taken with the comment that the show itself is a question mark. It's not a series of answers, and it should be a prompt for, if it is used, it should be a prompt for discussion. But I think the evidence of schools that have used it in a thoughtful way is that it does prompt conversations and discussions among the pupil population that sometimes it's quite difficult to commence or begin or to stimulate. So, as I say, I think it's quite a powerful resource, and schools are using it and using it well.
Would anyone else like to contribute?
Yeah, absolutely. The themes are very important, and we need to have conversations about the themes, but we should have them in ways in which are well-resourced, that are expertly guided, that are best practice. And for schools to do that via showing a TV program, I think is going to be very challenging. I agree, it's up to the schools to make that decision, but it's going to be very challenging. I think if it's a question mark, the question mark has really hit home for the adult population, and I would prefer to recommend it to teachers and parents and have a conversation with them about actually how do you help your young people. Because we know that when we speak to young people in our youth advisory groups, they can recognise the stories, but they don't recognise necessarily themselves in that character of Jamie. They're at a distance from that character, even though he's a crucial character for us as a society to understand, as are those other young people in that show.
Interesting, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you. Kiris.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for coming in. We heard the first panel there mention the manosphere. So Matt, I was really interested from your experience, to what extent do you think social media is having an impact on misogyny amongst young men and boys?
Yeah, I think it's having a huge impact. I think when the boys I do workshops with and the boys that I speak to up and down the country, the older they get now, as I think Jack mentioned in the previous panel, Andrew Tate is actually a bit of a joke now for those older boys. Also, interestingly, the popular boys. It's not the popular boys that like Andrew Tate. Andrew Tate teaches boys how to be strong and good looking, and the popular boys, rightly or wrongly, are already that in many school communities. But yeah, it's lower down again, I think Jack said, it's influencers on YouTube with just 6,000 followers. There's lots of copycat Andrew Tates, and I do think actually I wouldn't go as far to say that Andrew Tate isn't the problem. I think if we can tackle Andrew Tate and his pernicious influence, then it sends a good message to all those who are trying to grift and earn a quick buck by copying his model. For me, it's not actually the overtly misogynistic stuff. I think there's issues on there like body image. I think the emphasis on dating. I even think the mainstream media, things like Love Island, where people are talking and using phrases like body count, which is a military term for how many people you've killed to refer to how many people you've had sex with, which is deeply problematic. And the fact that lots of parents and teachers are watching this programme with unbridled glee and talking about it. So is it any wonder that this misogyny and this toxic kind of coercive control that you see in a lot of relationships is filtering down into the male communities that exist within a school. So yes, social media is a problem, but I don't necessarily think the mainstream media should be let off either. It's not just what they're watching, it's what they're seeing in their daily lives that is having an impact too.
Yes. Oh, yeah, Daniel.
Thank you. There's something here which is, again, Adolescence captured it very well, but if we look at why young men are actually attracted to this thing, a lot of it needs to be understood in terms of their unmet needs. Like they're going because they're confused about their relationships, about their own well-being, about what it is to be an adult and be valued in our society, etc. And I think a big clue in tackling the online spaces is actually provide those sorts of conversations and that sort of support around all of our young people through community programs, etc. There's a recent report, I think, released last week on Thursday by Movember, which was looking at the influence of manosphere influences. And one of my colleagues sat in the back row there, was part of the research group there. But some of the interesting things for me coming out of that report was the correlation between people who, men who consume a lot of manosphere content, actually feeling more optimistic, but at the same time having worse outcomes in terms of poorer mental health, in terms of taking riskier attitudes to their own bodies, in terms of severe like self-reliance, all of those sorts of things. So we can see here that people are looking for a particular answer. They're finding it, as we've heard from a lot of different people, through these particular versions that get pushed through them subtly or explicitly through algorithms. But if we can actually address some of those underlying concerns, we'll go a long way to stopping the appeal of these more pernicious places.
That's really interesting. Darren, did you want to add anything?
Just to say the kind of challenge that adults face in this space is that a lot of the discussion is around Andrew Tate, and we know that there have been surveys done recently about the extent to which Andrew Tate's content has penetrated that 16 to 25-year-old demographic. But I thought it's very interesting, some of the commentary around adolescence was that some of the children who are maybe in that younger phase, so say 12 to 16, didn't really know who Andrew Tate was. And if they knew about Andrew Tate, he was someone who they knew people who were older than them talked about. So it's so fast moving, and it's a real challenge, I think, for staff working in schools, people working with children, to try and make sure that they understand what's current and what's having an impact now. And again, that's something you often hear from teachers.
Yeah, and I think that's why shows like Adolescence are so important, because for me as a new parent coming into a new world, I mean my son's 2, so I'm not new, but it is something that I'm starting to think about, having a little boy in the kind of world that I'm in the kind of work that I do. And so it's opening up that conversation. I think that's why shows like Adolescence are so powerful. But I think I want to touch on, again, something else that the first panel mentioned around the way that this content and algorithms sort of expose young people to this content. So I know video game chat rooms, for example, are something that a lot of younger boys use. So is that another sort of gateway into this misogynistic kind of content?
I don't know enough about it. I know that it can be misogynistic. But.
Yeah, and I'll have a look and send the report across, but there was a recent report that I was reading just in terms of how quickly the chat rooms, people are actually exposed to content which is either overtly sexual or misogynistic or racist and things like this that are coming up in chat rooms. I also know that there's a lot of work being done by those sorts of spaces, particularly like AI regulation of comments and of verbally made comments.
Yeah.
So I know there's work being done in those spaces, but it does seem to be like a really important place, because it's often where parents will, let their kids jump online and play for a few hours, because for various reasons, not expecting that there's something else going on through the headphones or in the chat box on the side.
Did you want to add anything there, Darren or Matt?
I think maybe we might come on to this in terms of what can actually be done to address this problem, and I think that example maybe of game-related chat rooms, I think shows that part of this has got to be, I think you were talking earlier about critical thinking, about how children, young people can be given the skills and the tools they need to reach their own sound judgments about what they're confronted by. That seems to me to be at least part of the solution here. So how can young people perhaps test the veracity, let's say, of an assertion that they come across online or in a chat room? I think that's a really important part of it. We've got the Curriculum and Assessment Review in England currently underway. I know that they are interested in those kind of topics and those areas and how those might be supported through the curriculum. But I think that shows that, yes, there are all kinds of interventions that we can make, that the government can make. But I think if we can give young people the confidence and the ability to maybe engage more appropriately with the material that they encounter, that might be a big part of getting to a better place.
Yeah, Daniel.
Particularly because the subcultures around each of these places are very different. and also constantly changing. So we're not going to be able to actually, no teacher, no educator whatsoever is going to be able to say, this is everything you're going to encounter and what it means and what it might be interpreted as. That's in constant flux. So it's much better to upskill the young people to do that work for themselves. And our experience as an organisation is they actually, A, enjoy it, and B, really can do that work quite successfully if given the space and a couple of tools.
Yeah, and I guess it's especially important when we're sort of quickly realising that access to this kind of content and these kind of cultures is quite insidious actually in the way that it's consumed. I wanted to come back a little bit about and talk about misogynistic influences. Matt, I think you touched on this earlier, but why do you think this misogynistic influence? I think Jack mentioned this marketing of misogyny. Why is it so successful? Why is it taking on?
I think that I think that so much of teenage life is focused on romantic or sexual success and physical attractiveness. Now, that was the case when I was at school 10 years ago. But, now with social media, even the positive influencers, I'm not talking about all of these toxic ones and the alpha bros, even the good guys, they've all got these six packs and, these beautiful girlfriends and wives and beautiful homes. And this is the kind of stuff that kids are seeing all of the time. And, when they get into the school environment, your status in the student hierarchy is determined by how attractive you are to members of the opposite sex. Now, if you are someone who has not found their feet in the dating game at 15 years old, 16 years old, what these toxic influencers do is, firstly, they provide an explanation for your lack of success. Things like the 80-20 principle. Okay, well, you're, as a man, you're disadvantaged anyway. So not only does it provide an explanation, but it also provides a way out. Give me £5 a month, sign up to my blog, and I'll tell you how you can obtain wealth, how you can assert yourself over women, how you can look good. I'll give you a gym program. They're monetizing it. So I think it provides very useful explanations for their failures, and also a way out of it. And there are many ways for boys to fail. We're in constant competition with each other to be the best at Fortnite, to be the best at football, to be the funniest, to be the best dressed. And you can't possibly be all of those things all at once. And so what they can guarantee is that every boy is going to be a failure in some area. And how about we tell him that we can sort him out? And that's what they're doing.
Yeah, Tanya, briefly.
Oh, sorry, I just wanted to say before we move on to your next section, please. Thank you.
Briefly, Daniel.
There's something I think really interesting in this where I spoke to our schools coordinator today, and he said one of the things he really wants to get across was there's a difference in the answer the boys will give when you ask them what's a good man and what's a man that you look up to. And the first one, they'll be talking about their teacher, their brother, their dad, someone in their community that has these wonderful positive attributes that we probably all would also see. And then the other one is someone who doesn't have to go through the hard stuff that their brother and their uncle and whatever else has to go through because he's a professional athlete or a movie star or whatever else. And I think for us, somehow we've got to get through and actually help those young boys understand that being that good man is also a pathway to really good things in your life, because it's not the message that they're getting.
Thank you. Darren, I wanted to ask a little bit around what extent you think the manosphere and misogynistic online content sort of translates into more violence against women and girls, including sexual harassment on and offline.
I think it does, because I think teachers tell us that it does, that it's a significant contributor to that. So the material that children and young people access online, here we're talking about material of a misogynist nature, but there are other forms of insidious content that young people are accessing. But if we think about misogynistic material that young people access online, we know that that reinforces flawed belief systems, and it does lead then to inappropriate behaviour. So there is a clear link. It's more complex. I think the evidence we heard before was really, I think, compelling in terms of this is a complex issue, and maybe sometimes it's oversimplified, but there is a clear link between what children and young people access online, how it reinforces inappropriate belief systems, and then in some circumstances how those beliefs can then manifest in behaviours, abuse, violence that are wholly inappropriate but are related to the kind of ideologies that young people have accessed.
Great, thank you very much.
You on to your next section, or you?
That's it.
That's it?
Yeah.
Okay, that's all right. I just wanted to make sure. Rosie.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to talk more broadly about phones and social media. Matt, what impact do you think screen time, phones and social media are having on young people more broadly?
It's tiring them out. It's exhausting mentally. You know, the pressures that it puts on them, particularly young girls, in terms of how they're meant to look and act, but also boys. Many of the boys I work with up and down the country are just tired all the time because, as has been said previously, they're taking their phones to their rooms and they're not coming off them. I mean, I'm addicted to my phone, so why shouldn't a 16-year-old be or a 14-year-old be? Especially at an age where validation is, you don't have that level of self-possession that you only acquire through adulthood. You know, likes and follows is all that matters for some kids. And that's understandable because that's the world that they've grown up in. I would say that I think sometimes a lot in the discourse we often forget that actually also social media does provide a positive outlet for some students. There are students who have zero confidence and would never reveal anything about themselves in the classroom or on the playground or in the real world, but a simple update to their status or, you know, a photograph or you know, sharing some artwork provides a really positive outlet for them. I'm actually in favour of a social media ban, but I do think it has to be thought about very carefully because for some kids it is positive, and before we ban anything we need to think about how are we going to plug the gaps, because there must be a reason why kids are turning to social media to express themselves rather than to us. So what are we not providing them, and how are we going to find out what we're not providing them, and then how are we going to replace it?
That was a really interesting answer, thank you. Dr. Guinness, do you largely agree with that? And do you support a ban as well?
Do I largely agree with that? Yes. In terms of the sorts of impact that it's having on young people, absolutely. We're hearing similar things coming back. I think there's also this you know, it's linking also into those issues about, well, what information are young people getting access to and how they're understanding it and how controlled is that and how useful is that for them. But again, I think highlighting some of the ways in which social media could connect a young person who might be extremely socially isolated. You can imagine like a young LGBTQIA+ person in a school or community that doesn't have much support for them, really finding important connection and support elsewhere. So these things are important, but certainly we would like to be living in a world where what was on the screens in front of our young people is very different to the content that's there at the moment. And ideally that they and us are not on our phones as much as we currently are.
Thank you. Do any of you want to say what you think could be done to combat the negative impact of spending so much time on social media and online? And Darren, I don't know if you think that's an answer that might be able to be related to schools.
I think there is an interesting link there because there's a bit of a contradiction in some of the directions policy's going in. So at the moment, there was an inquiry conducted by, I think, the Science and Technology Committee of the House of Commons in the last Parliament that was looking at young people's screen time and looking at digital poverty and those kind of issues. And the debate that they were exploring was around the use of technology in schools. So moving away from kind of paper and pencil to more on-screen kind of forms of learning. And I think one of the themes that emerged from that debate is that we could be rapidly moving into a world where children spend almost the entirety of their time at school in front of a screen. And then when they're out of school, they're in front of screens in their personal life. And so the extent of kind of dominance that screen time has on children, young people's lives, I don't think we understand it. But I think we've got to think about how we can create spaces in children's lives when they're not on screen, when perhaps they're using a pen and a piece of paper, perhaps they're engaging in physical activity, because the degree to which young people are spending so much time in front of screens and maybe spending even more time in front of screens in schools is a really interesting question that I'm not sure we've quite thought through enough yet.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rosie. Dr. Guinness, you talked about the sort of content that young people are viewing online. Obviously, one of those areas is pornography, particularly violent and often misogynistic pornography. One study found that 13% of sexually active girls aged between 14 and 17 had already been choked. What do you think the role of violent and often misogynistic pornography is playing in this rise of misogynistic behaviour and attitudes?
Yeah. I mean, the choking example is very important to look at because it's a clear demonstration of the ways in which what is considered amongst a younger generation as normal sexual behaviour has shifted markedly. And now, actually, it might be exactly the same study or a related one that showed that there's a very large percentage of young people who see that as a normal part of sexual activity, rather than being something that's either, that could be harmful. It's like this is actually sort of what's accepted in an interaction. And that's come through because of what sorts of pornography exists that young people are accessing. And I think there's something very important here about actually the regulation that exists for pornography, particularly online pornography, and the fact that all of these things are voluntary, that we don't have the BBFC actually going through that content and applying regulation. And it seems like a very worrisome and outdated loophole that exists there for the place that actually most people are accessing pornography, if that's what they're doing. So there's something very important that we need to be doing to make sure that whatever images that young people are seeing, that we're trying to make sure that those are being accompanied by information for those young people around. Sorry, I want to be very clear here. We're not trying to show porn to young people. That's really important. But recognizing that young people are actually coming across these images, we want to be making sure that firstly we regulate what is out there and what is in the mainstream. And then secondly, that we're actually giving the young people the ability to have some literacy around that content and to actually understand that this isn't where you get your information about what a healthy relationship is. We're not, a lot of the porn that's consumed doesn't show consent conversations or people actually saying, I don't want this, not talking about desires. It shows a lot of racialized sort of ideas get pushed forward. A lot of ideas are placed there which normalize violence or normalize these sorts of interactions. So it's very important that young people are also given very comprehensive education around, well, what are healthy relationships and how do you form those healthy relationships with somebody? That's a really crucial part of this picture.
Thank you very much. Christine.
Thank you. I wondered if we could ask Matt, first of all, we've talked a lot about the online challenges, but do you think there are other key challenges that face maybe young men and boys today? How are they different from previous generations? And do they feel that maybe those things are being ignored by the mainstream in politics? Well, I'll ask Matt first of all.
I think body image is a huge one. The pressure on young boys to look muscly, low body fat, six pack. I think we really underestimate the toll which that has on young people, on young boys particularly. I think that academic underperformance in relation to girls is a perennial problem, and that's because of societal expectations around what it is to be a man. I think that there is this crisis of connection. I think that when boys get to 14, 15 years old, they're far less likely to be comfortable in expressing intimate feelings, and I don't mean sexual intimate feelings, I mean tender feelings for friends. In 11 years old, a boy might say, yeah, I've got a best friend. I've literally had boys aged 15 saying, of course I don't have a best friend, that's gay. Never mind the homophobia that's embedded within that idea. And so what's happening is boys are growing up in a world where not only do they not have those platonic friendships, which are so crucial to our development and our happiness, but they're also existing in a world where romantic and sexual success is paramount. And if they're not getting that, but also they don't have those platonic friendships to fall back on, it's no wonder that many boys are being seduced by the ideologies, incel ideologies, for example, that exist within the manosphere, all those darker areas of the internet. So I think we really do need to think about how we can get boys to connect with one another, and how we can, at an early age, really tackle the homophobia that exists within the idea that I can't have a best friend that's male because that's gay. That's a problem.
I wonder, is there a difference, or have you detected any difference when it comes to ethnicity or class in the issues that are facing young men and boys, and maybe how they react?
You mean in social class?
Yeah.
Sorry.
And ethnicity.
Yeah, I get asked this a lot. I've been to some of the top independent schools in the country, and I've also been in some of the most socially or economically deprived areas, and I get asked this question a lot. Actually, no. I think that the pernicious influence of toxic masculinity exists within both those spheres, although it might come out a bit differently. I think perhaps in the higher echelons of society, particularly in independent schools where there might be quite a masculine sports culture, I often see what's called a lot of ironic homosexuality. So the boys are actually very intimate and very physical with each other, but almost in we're poking fun out of it. Look how alpha male we are. We can touch each other in ways that really probably aren't appropriate, but that's who we are. But apart from that, you might have you've gone all over the place.
I agree with the influence of, particularly the restrictive influence of some of those ideas about expression, about asking for help, and forming relationships. I absolutely agree those things are prevalent everywhere. I think there's some really important differences in the experiences and outcomes that young men are having, and that we should take an intersectional approach in terms of both how we understand the issues and also how we respond to them. Just some examples would be a young trans man at the moment will be facing a degree of transphobia and worrying about how they fit into their community. That would be very heightened. We've got young black men reporting to us or through other sources about worries about being adultified and criminalised in various spaces, about being worried how they might be treated by authority figures, or they might be much higher rates of exclusion, some of which have been shown to be related to some of our perceptions of young black men. We have some of those class elements being really important, and we can think about this in a regional and sort of what resources are available in different places. And if we start to look at the ways in which some areas of the country there have been a shift away from certain job types, that's really been impacting upon working class jobs that may have been stable for over several generations. And then what's being seen is that young women have been much better at actually getting that training, then upskilling and shifting their careers. And young men, for a variety of reasons, both some internalized identity things related to masculinities and related to local pride, and also some structural things about the ways programs might have been set up, and also some societal things about what jobs are spoken about as being men's jobs. You know, we don't speak much about like this caring or these education sort of jobs as being men's jobs. For all of those reasons, those young men, those communities have massively different outcomes, whether it's around health, mental health, jobs, employment, training, well-being, healthy relationships, rates of imprisonment. All of these things impact upon the communities in really different ways, depending on class and ethnicity and disability and other things as well.
Yeah. Is there a perception amongst young men or amongst society generally that mainstream politics is just either unaware or ignoring these, and do you think that's true? Daniel, first of all.
Sure. Absolutely, yes, among a very large cohort. And it's fed via this narrative, which might be explicitly said by some people. You know, this feminism has gone too far. Women are trying to disenfranchise you somehow as men. You've been emasculated. These sorts of explicit messages, but also these things that are reinforced in various media commentaries, even politicians talking about these points. And I think absolutely that's there. And as we start to move to put a focus on addressing men's issues, I think we need to be extremely careful not to do it in ways that creates this false sense of us versus them. You know, if it's men versus women, we've got to wind back feminism. And I think actually we should really be looking at, partly, not entirely, but identifying the benefits that men have had through the feminist movement and through the gains that women have had. And you only have to speak to fathers who stay home with their children now to hear that story, or to men who have been learnt new skills of expressing themselves and found new pursuits to get that story coming through. And I was really heartened. I know there's a lot going on, whether it's the men's health strategy or this particular work or the work on ending violence against women and girls, lots of pieces that are coming up that could relate to this issue. And I think they all need to have that common statement that clearly says this isn't us versus them. And I was incredibly heartened. I heard one of the architects of the Irish men's health strategy, which is like global leading, well ahead of the trend. And he came in, and the first thing he said was that when they set out their policy, their intentions, they said it was going to be intersectional, that it was going to be feminist informed, and that it was going to talk about men as not being the cause of their problems, but as people who experience those problems. And for me, I was like, that's a nice, simple way to cut through a lot of this noise and link these different policy areas together.
I think there's do those perceptions of feminism, or from what you're saying, it sounds to me as if you think those perceptions of feminism have played into the creation of this kind of manosphere attitude?
Certainly. If you think about what's the experience of a teenager who's grown up over the past 10 years, you know, they've lived through their online lives, which is possibly one of the most important parts of their lives, have been shaped by things like Me Too, by Everyone's Invited. They've been shaped by a lot of movements that have said, we need to care about women's rights, and also they've lived through moments where there's been very, I think, harmful and simplistic messages like all men are trash or this sort of thing that they haven't been able to. It's hard for a 15-year-old to comprehend that the type of expression of built-up frustration that can come out in a moment like that, which I think is important to let out, but it's hard for them to hear that and not think that's a comment about them personally. And I think that's a crucial part of that fertile ground that these misogynistic influences, plant their seeds in, because there is a sense from some of the not just boys, you can see these people in politics and in the media, but there's a sense there that men have been attacked by some of these movements that have been for social progress and equality.
Them and us is already there, and we just
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you. Alex.
Thank you. Diana, I'm going to start with you on this one, if that's okay. What do you think of the use of the term toxic masculinity?
Yeah.
Frequently used. I use it. We all use it, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think sometimes in a space as a shorthand where everyone knows what they're talking about, it's okay. It sums up. There's lots of harmful things that can be related to particular versions and expressions of masculinity, and we've spoken about them, like your mental health, violence against women, violence against other men. However, I think as an educational tool and also as a tool in public narratives, I don't think it's serving a useful purpose. I think it's alienating a lot of people, and people are, particularly men, are struggling to differentiate between toxic masculinity as a describer of a set of expectations, like a particular expression of being a man, and men in general.
Yeah.
And we can do that work of being like, there's two things here, right? But that happens in a classroom setting when you can have a discussion with people. And in a sense, the social media narrative and media narratives, I feel they've gotten away from that ability to actually explain that concept.
Is it becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy?
Precisely. It breeds this resentment, and it breeds defensiveness, and it breeds, I'll show you what, like you think I'm toxic, I'll go and be that.
The irony. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Darren, I'd like to just, I'm looking at the role of men and masculinity in society, so I'm trying to draw some threads together here. And one of them is just coming back to the school's point of the misogyny from male pupils towards female staff. And I used to work in the domestic abuse sector, and we saw a vast increase in what was termed child-to-parent abuse, which was very gendered. Let's face it, the vast majority was teenage boys' abuse to mothers. Is this part of the same societal trend? Are those two things interlinked, do you think?
I think it's complex, but the case for there being a link has got to be compelling. So when you see that misogynistic abuse directed, when our members see it directed by pupils towards staff in schools, you wonder what's driving that and what kind of misaligned thinking is leading to a belief on the part of the child that is an appropriate way to behave. And the fact that you see it outside of the school as well as in school perhaps tells you something about where these beliefs are coming from and how deeply entrenched they are in some boys.
Thank you. And I am leaping around a bit, but like I said, I was trying to draw these threads together. Matt, my question for you was that there is, we have talked today about this huge increase now on focus on body image, and what that means for young boys and men. This is something, a focus on body image is something that women have experienced for decades, and to considerable health disadvantage at times when we look at some of the consequences of plastic surgery, for instance, and many other things. Given that there seem to be in so many areas, that I've just picked one, actually similarities of experience, but pitted against each other. How do we counter that? Is it with connections? Is it how do we counter that?
You mean
how we're all actually on the same side?
Yeah. I do think there needs to be a lot more work in schools on gender as a construct, and children in a mixed setting, for example, talking about gender and the challenges that both genders face, or some of which are the same and some of which are very different. Given its grip on media, politics, relationships and society in general, employment, it beggars belief that there isn't a more structured curriculum, a gender curriculum, Of course, there's all sorts of things we could teach, but when do we find the time? But certainly I think, the PSHE curriculum could go a long way to dealing with gender. And also actually sex and relationships education. I've started to wonder recently, how much emphasis do we put on the relationships part? Are kids learning how to be a supportive partner? Are kids being told, about online dating and what that might look like one day? Are kids being told about coercive and control? And are they being taught about how you should refer to somebody that you find attractive? And I don't know if there is enough on that side of things. So many boys and girls, there is this constant binary because they've never had this shared discourse about this confusing world of adolescence, of adulthood also, which they're all trying to navigate really together, but struggling at times,
Thank you. Just one more question. Daniel, I'd like to get your thoughts on this. And again, it's a slight leap. I recently had the great fortune to have a visit to Tokyo, and something was thrown into sharp relief there in a way that it hasn't been in other cities, and that was that we went to the area of the city that is all about gaming and tech, and while there, there were dozens of women in micro mini skirts handing out flyers. There were big pictures of highly sexualized manga content, etc., on billboards. It was very, 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 very visible, to the point my teenage daughter was extremely uncomfortable. Do we have are we talking about online too much more than offline, and should we be talking about the culture more generally? And is there a problem with the wider tech sector that is exacerbating this, or is it just a small isolated thing that's coming up from time to time? Do you think?
I was worried you're asking me for an analysis of Tokyo culture.
Not at all. No.
I'm glad we can go there.
Just as a micro example.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. I don't think I'm an expert on this particular thing. What I can see is that the tech sector as a whole doesn't have a great record in terms of addressing misogyny, sexism.
Bros, isn't it? Underestimate.
Yeah.
Like tech bros, isn't it?
Yeah. You don't have, even the way that leadership distribution looks globally, etc. There's not a great track record there. So there's certainly, I suspect, having not done a systemic or a cultural analysis of that space in particular, but I suspect there's some fundamental issues, and that some probably would benefit from some deep training with some people in leadership there to actually understand and reflect upon their own experiences and how actually they show up in their decision making and who they bring into those decisions. So that I think is an important thing to look at. And then in terms of, do we speak too much about online and not about offline? I think those two things are melded together and both very important. And yes, we certainly need to be looking at some of the offline spaces. One of the things we would do with a school, for example, is get the senior leaders and teachers to reflect upon, well, what are the pictures that are up on your walls? Or what are the things that the things that students will hear and see and experience and think as they move through your school? And we find that even in really schools that are very advanced on these issues, there's still things that they can pick up and say, oh yeah, actually, maybe we should shift the photos around occasionally, so it's not just this activity or that activity that's in the limelight. So stuff like that is important for us to think about the spaces that we create and what they show, how they are going to be actually shaping the experiences and the worldviews of the young people, and to be frank, of all of us as we move through them.
Thank you, Alex. Catherine.
Thank you. I want to talk a bit about role models, and some boys do go down the rabbit hole, don't they? Every boy is exposed to this content, I think, but some boys go down the rabbit hole and some boys don't. Has any research been done about whether it's a strong role model that stops them going down that rabbit hole?
I've got a lot to say about role models, particularly in schools. I think this idea that boys need male role models, I think it does huge disservice to the majority of the profession who are women, and also single mothers, also mothers who are in partnerships with men, support workers, staff working in schools. I think it does a huge disservice to them to say, I'll tell you what we need, we just need somebody who is a male. Also, the fact is, you know, for every boy who's gone off the rails for lacking a positive male role model, there's another boy who's gone off the rails because he's got some very negative male role models in his life. So I think what we're better focused on is looking at actually what makes a good role model. I suspect it isn't the possession of a penis, or, you know. I would also say that actually when you ask about the research, when we look at the research into what's good for boys and girls, actually kids don't really care about the gender of their teacher. As long as their teacher is authentic, consistent and has firm boundaries, they're happy. That's not to say that I don't think there's advantages of having, for example, more men in teaching as a visibility issue, to tell to boys, oh wow, it's okay to be nurturing, it's okay to have a job in which you're unashamedly enthusiastic about the pursuit and accumulation of knowledge. I think that's a wonderful thing. Perhaps that's where, yes, I think there's an advantage, but I wouldn't say, I'd be reluctant to say that being male is what makes the role model. I think there is some research on absent fathers, but again, the research isn't great on that. There is a suggestion that kids with absent fathers might have periods of delinquency, but then again, what is an absent father? I think we talked about social class earlier. Many people think that an absent father is a father who just isn't around. Well, what about your dad, who's a hotshot lawyer, who is away for most of your life? You know, so again, we have to look at, well, what actually is an absent father? So I think that's a complex issue, and I think that any discourse around boys needing positive male role models needs to be carefully approached with people who are probably far more expert than I am.
Either of you want to come in on that?
It's a big debate in schools. So in terms of what proportion of teachers are men, and perhaps those teachers, just by virtue of the fact that they are men, are sometimes supposed to be able to act as role models. And I was a primary school teacher. There are some prejudices that you do see manifest back then and now. So often you'll find if you get, let's say, a 1-form entry primary school, there's one male teacher. That male teacher will almost always be allocated to year 5 or year 6 because they're seen as presenting more behaviour challenges, and men in and of themselves are innately deemed to be more effective at dealing with those behaviours. If you look at the primary sector itself, you know, you've got maybe around 9-10% of primary school teachers are men, but still around half of all primary head teachers are men. And that's about notions of leadership and how that's understood in a context. And what message does that send to girls in those primary schools about what it takes to be a leader? So I think we've got to be really careful about the characteristics we ascribe by gender to particular roles, and whether those people, just by virtue of their gender, can act as role models or are presumed to be able to act in particular ways that serve as a role model to in this case, boys.
And what role do fathers have, if you want to answer this, Daniel, in showing a positive version of masculinity?
Fathers, as with other people in young people's lives, like other adults, can play a huge role in demonstrating very positive ways of being a human, and challenging like very restrictive ways, ideas and concepts of masculinity. I mean, I agree with both my fellow panelists on like, we actually need to focus on the quality of what's being put forward there. And I think there's, just as an example, there's huge social benefits and economic benefits as well that could come from different parental leave policies that opened up more opportunities for men to be with their children, or distribute that labour more evenly across couples. But the benefit for young people is really only going to be realised if we actually equip those new fathers with the skills that they need to do that work. I mean, it'd be great if we were equipping all of our new parents with that. But we do know that in our society, men aren't really generally being socialised into those roles. And so there's a bit of a catch-up piece that many men that we work with, who are, for example, in workplaces and either have been on leave or not, actually talk about learning so much more than what their wife, if they're in a heterosexual relationship, than what their wife knew about raising kids or that sort of care, and also not having access to spaces that there were other men in. They'll turn up to a young children's group and it's them and 8 women. And sometimes they feel or are made to feel as a bit of an outsider, or they just don't know, is this dealing with the sorts of issues that I'm having at a personal level? So, I think the same can be thought, same sort of thing, like how can we actually equip the men who are already in these roles to tackle the gender norms that might be in those places, whether that's teaching or as fathers, and how can we actually help them on the personal level in form and play those new parts that they weren't socialised into by their parents. Like, this is broader cultural change that we're trying to help here.
Thank you, Catherine. Matt, I just wanted to come back to what you were saying about we don't have the conversation about what a healthy relationship looks like.
Yeah.
I would probably say we never have done with our parents, but obviously there is a place which is seemingly an attractive space to have an idea of what a relationship is, and that's the online space, whether it's influencers, whether it's social media, all of that. But how do parents, caregivers and schools have those conversations in a way that is still more attractive and safe than online?
Yeah, well, that's the problem, isn't it? You want to talk to your teacher about sex and relationships, or it's embarrassing, isn't it? Yeah, I think it starts early, doesn't it? I think the problem is, Daniel earlier mentioned pornography, for example, right? We as a society like to think that our young people, our sons and our daughters, our students are not watching pornography. All the research suggests the opposite is true. Of course they're watching pornography. So what you might get is a set of teachers or a representative body saying, do you know what, we need to talk to children about pornography. And then there's uproar in the mainstream media, stories about teachers bringing in sex toys and ridiculous things like that. That might, maybe it happened once, but it's not, all teachers want to do is talk about pornography. That's not true. But the problem is, until we get that balance right, until we get comfortable with having these frank and honest discussions in which children are not stigmatised for having watched pornography. The way we often talk about boys and girls who watch pornography is that they are somehow sexually deviant for having done that, as if we, prior to the age of 18, never felt an inch of sexual desire. Also, let's not forget that many children watch pornography because it's sent to them. It's not necessarily that they've sought it out. And so what you've got is a situation where there are all these children being made to feel that because they have watched pornography or because they've encountered it, they are somehow dirty, filthy, deviant, and therefore that's creating a real barrier to having frank and effective discussions. I mean, essentially, in answer to your question, parents and teachers, I guess, but I guess the job is best served by parents, really need to be taught how to make their own children feel that they can be honest, without judgment and without admonishment, if that's the word. And until we get that right, I think it's going to be really difficult. There are kids that do it, you know, there are parents, we all know, we've probably all got friends who are wonderful parents and everything's perfect and they're having these great discussions over the dinner table and stuff. One of them's not lying, right? It's happening somewhere. So it can be done, but I think maybe our rather Victorian attitude towards sex as a society can be a bit of a barrier.
I think we've still got that British kind of stiff upper lip about sex. Do you think that?
I think so. I think the recent furore, was it about a year ago, when did they make changes to the sex and relationships education curriculum, and the way some mainstream media, some newspapers were suggesting that all teachers are these sex-crazed deviants who are determined to watch pornography with children. It was unbelievable. No, we just want to make sure that kids, if they are going to view pornography, we want them to be able to do it critically, safely, because they are allowed to watch pornography. You know, at the moment we don't have age verification. You know, a kid can access pornography in 6 seconds. So, you know, as a society, we're allowing them to do that because we're not putting the barriers that we should be in place. And so we also, if we're going to let them watch pornography because it's so freely available, then we also need to allow parents and teachers to be able to talk about it with them without the teachers and the parents coming under fire because they want to have these frank, constructive discussions about it.
Thanks, Matt. Darren, does this kind of reporting and I guess kind of prudishness, does it stop teachers being able to have this kind of conversation, this frank, open conversation?
I think they're difficult conversations that many parents find it difficult to have, and teachers in that sense are no different. I think one of the themes of the current debate around RSHE in schools is that we can talk about what's in the curriculum and what's in the guidance, and that's important. But I think to go back to a point that was made right at the beginning is that these responsibilities just get basically thrown at teachers to try and deal with. The majority of RSHE in our schools is taught by people who aren't specialists and have received no training in RSHE. When they want to go beyond the school and look for sources of advice and support, there isn't any there. So it's left to a teacher to try and address really complex, difficult, sensitive issues with no training, no support, and frankly a curricular framework that sometimes is quite ambiguous and in a very I think heightened and sometimes controversial political and social context. All of that falls on the shoulders of a non-specialist teacher in a secondary school and in a primary school.
Thank you. Just have 2 more questions. The first one, Dr. Guinness, is around mental health. What challenges are we seeing specifically in mental health for young boys and men, and what do we need to do to improve it?
Yeah, I think some of the challenges that young people experience around the mental health are common across genders. And I mean, we've heard around body image, we've heard around pressure, we've heard things like the bullying in online spaces, things like this are having a big impact, or just the amount of time that people are spending online. In terms of men and boys in particular, we're very aware about the lack of socialization and building up of their skills at developing empathy for others, at developing empathy for themselves, at communicating their emotions, about understanding their emotions. That leaves them at a huge deficit when it comes time to actually practice self-care or when it comes time to seek help. So we talk to each school that we go to. We're delivering about 800 workshops a year, so we have plenty of those conversations with school leaders, and we ask, what percentage of your services being accessed by boys, and typically the answer is 25% or less of services like counselling or support or anything like this are being used by the boys at that school. Typically, I mean, it varies obviously. So there's they're not using those sorts of services. Sometimes those things are seen as being not their spaces for some reason, but also there's a strong narrative being ingrained into boys from a very early age, generally speaking, about you need to deal with this problem yourself. Whether that's don't be a burden on your friends, or whether that's with a young boy, if they're crying, it's like stop crying, keep on moving. Whereas maybe with a young woman or a girl, you'd ask what's happened, what's wrong. All of these sort of little things add up, and it leaves boys not practicing self-care. If we sit in a classroom, we ask, like, who here does anything? In fact, my colleague in the back will sort of ask, maybe jokingly say something like, who would like put a bath, run themselves a bath and light some candles? And the boys will laugh at that concept, right? But it's actually a wonderful thing to do that's really enjoyable. And yet it's seen as not fitting into that acceptable set of things, both because it's care and because it's feminized. And I think those things really start to impact on men and boys. And then you have that layer of particular stresses that might come to them on the basis of whatever identities or whatever cultural groups or whatever social groups they fall within. And we've heard a lot about that in the first panel and from our panel. And so we're left with these people who've not been given the skills, who've been put in kind of a particular pressure cooker, and don't see that there's any services, well, too often don't recognise any services or support that is there available to them, and instead just want to solve all their problems by themselves and not talk to each other about it.
Thank you. Matt, quickly.
I just want to touch on the mental health issue, which I've previously described as the last taboo of mental health, which is anger. We all know that it's a well-trodden statistic, especially where we're talking about gender, that men are 3 times more likely to die by suicide than women. What's often not spoken about is that many studies have actually showed women are 2 to 3 times more likely to attempt to take their own lives, but men are more likely to die by suicide because of the violent methods that they use. There are lots of boys walking around who are frustrated, who are struggling, who are lonely, who are anxious, but they're also told that you can't talk about your feelings. And so what happens is you've got a lot of anger. That's problematic when we teach girls that being angry about something means you're bossy, or you're stressy, or you're sassy, or you're not ladylike, whereas lots of boys are being conditioned that overt expressions of anger, and the research backs this up, boys are far more likely to punch walls, flip desks, swear out loud, and I do think we need to think about anger. For example, punching walls. Over a 14-year career, boys come in, they're wearing these bruised knuckles like medals of their masculinity. How many teachers actually know that one study showed that the number way in which boys actually self-harm is through punching walls? We don't. And when a boy is angry, we naturally are frightened, intimidated, and of course that sort of behaviour needs to be dealt with. Any behaviour which intimidates or scares somebody else or is harmful needs to be sanctioned. But I do think we're missing a trick with when we see these overt, repeated displays of anger or aggression in some boys in schools. How often are we actually looking at that and thinking, do you know what? Yes, his anger's wrong, but does he need does he need some sympathy? Does he need some support here in the same way a girl who is self-harming using another method would? And I don't think we are. I do think that there are lots of angry boys there who are demonised and not necessarily given the mental health support that I think chronically angry people should probably get. I always do a thought experiment with parents and teachers. Who would you most like to be the best friend of your child? A boy who's diagnosed depressive, a boy with chronic OCD or a boy who goes to anger management classes, and they always pick the boy who goes to anger management classes as the boy they'd least like to be friends with their own child. Because, like I say, I think anger is one of the last taboos in mental health, when in fact anger is actually as natural as love, jealousy, greed, lust, you know. I think that's something we need to think about in schools.
Thank you very much. This last question is to all three of you, but you can write to us if you don't want to say it out loud here. Our committee is open and willing to be challenged at any given step. I think the way that we've approached all of our inquiries has been that way. One of the opportunities we want to have is to be able to hear from people who do monetize misogyny, who do market misogyny, because we want to know what is at the root cause of that, what is the aim. And so if you had one or two people that you think children are listening to, young people are listening to at the moment, as we'd heard from the previous panel, it's not the Andrew Tates of this world. Who is it that we should be hearing from, do you think? And as I said, you don't have to say it out loud now if you don't want to. You can do if you do.
I can send you a long list.
Thank you. That would be great. Do you think they'd come?
Sorry?
Do you think any of them would come?
Is there going to be cameras?
Yeah.
Yeah, they'll come.
They'll come. Okay.
No, I don't. I'm being facetious.
We might not get a chance to speak.
Yeah.
That'd be worse than me.
Thank you very much. This has been a really interesting couple of panels, and really grateful for all of your time and your experience and your expertise. And as I say, if there's anything that you think you wanted to cover that you didn't get to today, please write that to us. Thank you very much. This brings the session to a close. Order.
Thank you.